Yeah, question.
The handouts you just mentioned,
Yeah.
are they handouts that you could build sort of a family skills group around?
I didn't plant her. That's exactly the... Yes, treatment modes are flexible. That's exactly right. These are the handouts. We run a couples group, and sometimes we run a parent group. The parent group uses much the same stuff, but some specific parenting kinds of things that are added. I didn't give you those, but this is the stuff that we actually run our couples group with, is these handouts, or some version of these. We're changing them all the time, but this is a version of it. And we use these handouts when we also treat couples one at a time. So that leads to this discussion about modes. We work in different settings. In our setting, we treat a pretty severe population. Folks who get sent to our clinic. I don't know if you know this, but Nevada is a state that we typically rank 49th out of 50 in per capita mental health spending. So we say, thank heaven for Mississippi. Okay. We're very grateful for Mississippi, who ranks 50th typically. Occasionally Alabama, but we're very grateful when Alabama comes out 49th and we drop to 48th. We haven't been 50th yet. So we have a pretty severe population because there are very few public resources, very, very few. If there isn't child maltreatment involved, there are almost no public resources where I live. So our community, which is we're a university clinic, okay, so we're a community clinic. We don't serve the university per se, but the university pays the electric bill. And that allows us to serve very underserved people. So we have people who have pretty severe problems and for the most part no money. So it's a pretty working class, middle class, lower middle class, underclass set of folks. So sometimes, some of our folks want couples therapy, they want family therapy, they're interested in that, and that's what they want to do, and we provide that. Sometimes we have people who say, I don't want therapy, I'm not interested in therapy, therapists are really scary, I don't want to do that. So we offer them an educational group. We do exactly the same thing. We don't change a word, we use the same handouts, but we call it an educational group, okay? Somebody else, no, we don't want that education. We understand that we need therapy. Okay, sure, we'll give you therapy. Exactly the same thing. Very different, okay? And I'm pretty much telling you the truth, okay? So what we found, we haven't done a head-to-head comparison. We just don't have the resources to randomly assign people to getting a couples group versus individual couples therapy, okay? But when we aggregate our data over time, what we find is that it doesn't matter what the mode is. It does matter that people are willing to do it, okay? So there's probably something to be said for offering a mode that's palatable to people. But having said that, when we look at 25 or 30 couples that we see individually over a period of time, compare them to, say, 4 groups or 5 groups of couples that we do over the same period of time, their changes from before to after treatment look very similar. They're pretty much the same. So it doesn't really matter how you do it in your own setting. I think that's really good news. That's very practical information that I think research doesn't always tell us. But in this case, I think that the data support what we might call, efficiency, like letting people get what they want in terms of mode, but we get to be experts and give them the content and the processes that we think that matter. So, okay. All right. Now, most people here have some familiarity with dialectical behavior therapy in general. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but I do want to emphasize that this is DBT when we're working with couples and families. It really is DBT. And there's nothing we're doing that you couldn't reasonably infer from, say, Marsha Linehan's manual. Now, she doesn't talk about couples at all. Okay, she's honestly a little afraid of seeing couples. I mean, it's not her favorite thing to do. Afraid, that's not quite the right word. Marsha's fearless, okay? Marsha's a dear friend, but she's fearless, but it's not her cup of tea, okay? But you have to do a lot of inferring. And so rather than make you infer, here's what we're doing. So the dialectical piece here is very compatible with a systems approach. It's also very compatible with a behavioral approach. It's very compatible with an emotion-focused approach, all of which show up in the literature with couples work. Okay, they all do. But each of them has something that's missing a little bit for our population, which is why I've developed DBT for couples, because the emotion-focused folks are great about primary and secondary emotions, the expression of emotion, a little weaker on the validation, although I think it's there, but they don't really know what to do when somebody's imminently suicidal. There's nothing inherently obvious there, okay? Behavioral work is very good for communication, but not for regulating emotion. And there's nothing in integrative behavioral couples therapy for how to get yourself regulated. There's just nothing there. And I like integrative behavioral couples therapy, okay, but not for very dysregulated couples, okay? And systems work is great at the systems level, but breaks down when you have to go inside the person. That's why most systems people then adopt another model for individuals. They go to a psychodynamic model or a cognitive model or something else, which may be okay, but it's kind of tricky to flip-flop between, in my experience, it's hard to flip-flop between models. So in DBT, partly because I'm just a simple person, seriously, you don't have to flip-flop models. You can jump into the model and you use the same model for helping the person get regulated internally. The intrapersonal parts are the same model as the interpersonal parts. And you know, it's pretty respectful. There's not a lot of room for judgment. There's a lot of help for the therapist because we have a team. You know, there's a lot of parts here that are good for working with severe couples and families. So, having said that, you know, so dialectics is compatible with all those other things, but dialectics doesn't really show up in any of those. You know, you could say that, gee, in integrative behavioral couples therapy, there's acceptance and change, but there's no attempt to synthesize acceptance and change. There are acceptance pieces and change pieces, but they don't really get merged in the same way. Emotion-focused couples therapy, which I like a lot, is great on the acceptance end, but not much on the change side. There's just not much there. Systems work, I think you could say inherently has both acceptance and change. There is some dialectics in there, but there's no synthesis between the individual and the relationship. Okay? Am I making sense? So, I hope you can see, these are all therapies that I like and respect and I have used and have been trained in. So I'm not poo-pooing them in the slightest, but for our population where there really is severe dysregulation going on, I think each of those other models falls short someplace, which is why we're doing this. And I assume that's why you're here. So the piece of dialectical assessment that I think is very useful is the what's missing part. In systems family therapy, which typically takes a constructivistic approach to things, right? It's very compatible here, okay? But sometimes that constructivism can kind of almost hover around nihilism, like there isn't anything real. And the dialectic is there's both something very real and something that's entirely constructive. They're both true, instead of it's only constructive. In a systems version, on a postmodern version, or it's only real in an integrative behavioral couples sense, okay? In dialectics, they're both true. They're just different windows on the world. Okay. Am I making sense? So asking what's missing is a really useful tool. What's missing from our understanding that will help us move forward. Not what's missing from the truth. Truth is always got a small t here, okay? But what's missing in our understanding to help us move forward. It's very practical, okay? Truth is whatever helps us move forward. Whatever consistent with available evidence and helps us move. So it has to be consistent with the person's experience. It has to be, or it's not useful. But it has to go beyond the person's experience to also account for the other person's experience, which is, by definition, if they're coming to see us, really different. Okay. And so there's a synthesis here. Of course, we're not trying to figure out which one's right. Of course not. No good couples therapist is going to do that. But it's more, how can we truly value each person's perspective, truly, inherently, but develop a third way, a true synthesis out of that, a way that honors the essence of each person's experience, but not necessarily their explanation of that experience. We're willing to say the explanation is wrong, because the explanation is usually, what's the problem? You're the problem. Change her. she's the problem. Sorry, well, I'll give you the picture. But, right, or, and what she's saying is him, change him. He's the problem. I mean, did you ever not have a couple who said, what's the problem? They say, you know, the other person. So, we'll come back to this, what's missing, but that's kind of a mantra to have in the back of your mind. What am I not understanding? Okay? What is this partner not understanding? What's the other? What are we all? And sometimes we all are failing to understand. That's when we're really stuck in the therapy. And sometimes we're getting it, but one of the partners isn't getting it. Our job is to help them figure out what they're missing. Okay? And we've got some very obvious things, right? We've got the two big pillars here of accurate expression and validation. Those are obvious pieces that we're looking for what's missing. Okay? But behind those things, behind accurate expression, is an accuracy, like what's the person's experience? And then connecting that meaningfully to what happened. Okay? And what happened in the present moment, but also those threads of their history, their family of origin, their previous relationships, or their history with that person. Okay? Similarly with validation, what's the experience? I can't truly validate your experience if I really don't understand it. And I probably have to understand it not just in the sense that you tell me it's true, but I gotta understand it enough to really experience your experience as legitimate. I don't have to have the same experience, right? I could be warm and you could be cold, but I do know what it's like to be cold. So if I get my mind around that really is your experience right now, I can validate it even if I'm warm. Okay? That's tricky. That does require a sophisticated ability to have your own mind and a theory of another person's mind at the same time. Okay? Mindfulness of self and mindfulness of other in DBT language. So that's what we're going to focus on. So our thinking is both and thinking instead of either or. Okay? What's different here is, you're all familiar, I mean, I don't know how much of this is important, but you know, a lot of family therapists take this postmodern approach. Is that, you know what I'm talking about, right? This is decidedly not a postmodern approach because we can see that on the one hand, every construct is a concept and not real on the one hand, okay? But in a dialectical approach, there is something real underneath it, something very real. It's not only constructed, it's also constructed, if that makes sense. For those of you who aren't systemically, or just come back now. All right. So the ongoing process is one of polarizing and depolarizing. And rather than seeing polarizing as a problem, we welcome polarizing because polarizing is the way that we grow. We actually do something that's different from, I do something that's different from you, that's hard to understand, that you actually maybe is a little threatening at first, and then we polarize, which helps me clarify, and then helps you understand, and then we depolarize to a new synthesis. So rather than fight the polarizing, we love polarizing, we just don't want to get stuck there. We want it had to be an ongoing process of polarizing and depolarizing, polarizing and depolarizing, being independent and having a good life and having new ideas and then sharing them back together in a way that's not threatening, and then kind of objecting to something and not liking the other person's doing because we don't understand it, and then understanding it in a new way and having a richer relationship because of it. Polarizing and depolarizing. And an ongoing process is something that's, why not, if it's reality, why not lean into it instead of fighting it? Okay? Instead of conforming, it's deconforming? I don't know, whatever that is. And then understanding. Yeah?
I said it's the same as mindfulness of emotions.
Mindfulness of emotion.
Rather than pushing the other kind of
Exactly. Awareness, allowing, and changing when it gets in the way of our long-term goals. So, as you know, our short-term goals and our long-term goals are aligned. That's the synthesis, is always, gee, I can't stand this right now, I don't like what you're doing, but my response needs to not just be to stop you or get away from you, but to stop you or get away from you in a way that actually is going to bring us closer, because in the long term, I love you and want to have a good relationship with you. So it's how to synthesize my short-term goal of not liking something with my long-term goal of wanting to be close to you. And in couples, we assume in DBT that that is the long, one of the long-term goals is to be close, to be closer, to have a close, intimate relationship. Recognizing, of course, people's definitions of that are very different, okay? But we assume that. And at some point, that doesn't become true anymore, and then our goal is to help them separate well. Okay, that's just reality. So it's acceptance and change, same as in the primary polarity here is acceptance and change, but the acceptance and change has layers, right? It's acceptance and change of my own experience, and acceptance of change of your experience, acceptance and change of our transactional experience. So there's always three things going on. There's partner A, partner B, and the relationship between partner A and partner B. And we're the therapist to all three when we're the couples therapist. And I think that's part of the synthesis is recognizing that we're not just a systems therapist. We're not just a therapist to their relationship. That's a systems approach. And we're not just a therapist to each individual. Okay? We actually got to do all three simultaneously. And that's the win-win-win, right? So we would never ask a partner to do something that's not self-respecting, that is actually contrary to his or her goals and values. We would keep working at finding the next step that would be compatible with each person's goals and values and bringing the couple closer together in the long term. Always searching for the next step that's going to do all three things. And recognizing sometimes it's neutral on one part. It's not going to hurt one person, it's good for the other. That's fine. But we're never looking to harm anybody or the relationship. So our therapeutic style is also, just like an ordinary individual DBT, is that we're going to be dialectical in our communication. Sometimes we're going to be warm and caring and reciprocal in our communication, vulnerable, gentle. Okay? And sometimes we're going to be very confrontive and irreverent and like cut that shit out, kind of point clear. And we go back and forth freely between those two poles. With awareness that that communication style has to function differently with two people in the room than it does with one person in the room. If I've got an individual client, my warmth and caring has a particular impact on that person. Okay? I don't have to worry about its impact on anybody else, or mostly being compared to somebody else. But if I'm, let's say, there's such a thing as being too warm and caring in DBT, right? In DBT, one way to be too warm and caring is to not have enough push for change. And that's true in couples DBT too. But the other way we can be too warm and caring is if we show up the other partner. Because honestly, we're better at this than most other partners are. Okay? We are. We've been trained to do this, okay? Not only that, we don't have a dog in this fight. We can be warm and caring about something that's an ongoing conflict between them and much more able to understand and communicate or be validating than the partner. That's why they're here. We need to do that, but we need to withhold some of that because we don't want to show up the other partner. It's really important. So we've got to pay attention to not just that everything I say to you is to you, but there's somebody else here that's being affected by that, not just directly. Okay? That means sometimes we model like this is how we do it, but we often also stop short of being particularly effective and instead are going to prefer to coach the partner. Okay? Or if we do something, and I do this amazing what you can get away with. Okay, seriously. Sometimes I say something and I turn to the partner, no, that's what you meant, right? And I just move on. Don't wait for them to say no. Yes, that's what they meant. Because the other person feels like they got something from their partner. And I'm just crossing my fingers hoping that in 3 or 4 sessions the person's going to catch up. With enough pushing and modeling and dragging, right? Because, in fact, I did 100% of the validation, but I don't want to do it. That doesn't help their relationship. Then I'm just being partner A's therapist. And I'm actually harming partner B. I'm making the person look bad. So we've got this dialectics thing is very real and practical in the room. So this is part of the purpose of our team. Our team has to keep us from looking too good. We actually can't look that good here. We can't. This is a place where we can't be very clever. In fact, we have to look a little unclever sometimes. Consistent, solid, yes. Clever, not so much. Not too warm, unless we can slop it off on the other partner. Lots of coaching and lots of giving it away, giving it to the other partner. Look, I'm sure that that's what she meant. But it's hard to do that when you're dysregulated, but that's what she meant, right? Right, exactly. Yeah, sure. No, not at all. Well, it didn't even cross her mind, but now it does, okay? And if 10% of it sticks, that's great. That's okay, okay? Just like in individual DBT, metaphors and stories are a big part of couples work because something about metaphors allows us to go right at a phenomenon without the person feeling attacked. It's a wonderful strategy. You can use you can use metaphors that that basically where you're calling the person an idiot. Okay, not judgmentally, but like, this is ridiculous. This is not working. How could you possibly think it? But in the metaphor, the person's like, oh yeah, I get that, but doesn't feel offended by it because it's a metaphor. And honestly, in order to support the communication style, when I use a metaphor, usually I'm the schlump in the metaphor. Okay, I almost always make myself the person who's like not getting it, who's like doing the stupid thing. Okay. And I do that for lots of different reasons, but part of it is just diffusing the whole situation. Because it might be the metaphor is really about partner A, but the story is about me, okay? So, if I'm not really saying partner A's acting in a ridiculous way. I'm saying I acted in a ridiculous way. But both people get it, like partner A needs to change, okay? But I took the brunt of the negative emotion because I reacted in this. In the metaphor anyway, in the story, I reacted in a way that, why would you do that? Like, we don't understand that. Yeah?
Would you give examples of some metaphors?
Sure. You have to give me a situation. Unfortunately, my brain works like a metaphor machine. I don't know why that is, but I have to have a situation. Like, what would be the situation?
A couple attack one another constantly and try to be the top dog and the judgment and the hard words.
All right, so there's kind of mutual assured destruction going on, right?
Yes.
And what was the precipitant? Give me an example. And what happened? What was the event?
The wife didn't put water out for the dog.
Wife didn't put water out for the dog. Okay. So it's a little bit like, when you go camping and the weather's pretty nice, right? And you decide, I'm tired. I see stars. I don't think I'm going to bother with the tent. Well, that might work, but weather sometimes changes over the 10 hours between now and in the morning when you're going to pack up. You might get wet at around midnight. Okay. Now, does that make, so I don't put the tent up. Does that make me stupid? Evil? Or is it just a mistake? I might need to get a weather forecast next time. So you see what I'm getting? I'm not sure that's a perfect metaphor, but it's clearly a big mistake. We got all wet, okay? But, okay, kind of makes sense. So in other words, she didn't put the water out for some reason. We just don't know what it is. And there was some damage done. The dog, well, in this case, didn't get wet. The dog got dry. Okay. Does that make sense? So you just jump. I don't know. That was a new one. I just made
But
that up.
she says, yes, she usually does it, and he probably drank it. So they're all fighting about that.
But that's a different problem. So yes, she did. No, she didn't. I would probably stop and back it up. Like, when did you first start getting upset about this, and what else was going on? And that's, of course, part of DBT is doing a chain analysis. You'll see we're going to do these chains. Always going to stick in the present moment. DBT is an inductive treatment. We take a specific thing that happened, Saturday afternoon at 4:30, and start to understand that moment, and maybe connect that to other arguments, but we're going to stick with Saturday at 4:30, not talk about what she generally does in these situations or what he generally does. We're not going to do that. We're going to say, what happened on Saturday? And over time, those pieces, those different chains, if you will, those different analyses, form into a pattern. And then we can talk about patterns, but as reflecting individual situations, as well as the individual situations reflecting the patterns. Again, there's a dialectic. It's like some therapies would stick with the pattern. DBT, I think we're much more specific than that. Some therapies would never go to the pattern, but of course there are patterns. There really are patterns. This top dog thing is an interesting idea of a pattern. But we also want to make sure that sometimes people don't act in patterns. Sometimes people get out of patterns. We want to be awake to that too. Now, the last piece here is tricky for therapists because we're therapists, we're human beings too. And we bring our own repertoires, okay? We bring our repertoires that are based on our own families, they're based on our own sex role training, gender role training that occurs for all of us, whether we like it or not, we all do. And we all fall on continua with respect to our own comfort and balance between reason and emotion. Right? Reason and emotion are, not for every couple, but for many couples, are a piece of the conflict. Okay? One person sees the other person's emotion as illogical. The other person sees the other person's logic as unemotional, as kind of superficial. And of course in DBT, we see those as both not very useful, because we see reason as one continuum and emotion as another continuum, not reason and emotion at opposite ends of the continuum. In other words, you could have a lot of both, or you could have not very much of either. Okay? Or you could have balance. Okay? So in DBT, we try to actually educate, this is the psychoeducation piece, so people can start to respect the strengths of the other person, even if they're different, and sometimes contradict my strengths, or seem to. We try to use that as a way of depolarizing it. Oh, you're really logical and I'm really emotional. Huh, between the two of us, we've got a whole functioning person. Okay? Instead of, your being so logical is a threat to my emotionality. No, it's a compliment to my emotionality if I don't take it personally. And if you don't make it personal by telling me I'm wrong to be emotional. There's nothing illogical about emotion, right? Because emotion is just emotion. It's not supposed to be logical or illogical, it's emotion. And there's nothing unemotional about logic. Logic is just logic. It is what it is. You can have a lot of emotion about logic, or none. You can have a lot of emotion can be completely logical, or not make any sense yet, until we understand it. Okay? So in DBT, we're trying to sort those into two continuum. As a therapist, we've got to be careful that we love both continua, and we love both ends of both continua. We can't be too biased about being unemotional or very emotional, illogical or very logical, or just not logical, not valuing logic too much, okay, being more experiential. We, as couples therapists, have to see value on both continua, the entire continuum. Does that make sense? And that's going to be tricky, because sometimes we're going to get tweaked. None of us truly live on both continua fully from one end to the other. All of us have our preferences, okay? I mean, I don't know anybody who is so completely flexible that they are equally comfortable any place on both continua. I just don't know anybody. Anybody here that way? Because I'm going to sit down and you can stand up here. Because I don't know how to do that, okay? So we all have our bias. There's nothing bad about that. We simply have to be clear with ourselves and our team what our biases are. So if I start polarizing a little bit with one of the partners, on the one hand we want to welcome that, but we want to make sure it's not because I'm getting stuck in being right, that you're not emotional enough, you're not appreciating the value of this emotion, or, gee, you're missing the logic of this. I don't want to get stuck in that. Those could both be legitimate places I could go, but not with too much attachment. My team's got to keep me tethered to flexibility, great flexibility. Okay? So this reason and emotion thing is very tricky for us as therapists. We're also, of course, going to use acceptance and validation as a therapist strategy. We're going to be warm and validating, of course, and we're also going to be pushy and try and work hard to change situations. Lots of dialectics in this. Okay, questions about that? Just general dialectical strategies. All right.